Chinese AI startup Moonshot unveiled their Kimi K3 model, and not expected, but I guess they really jumped up the leaderboard on multiple different AI benchmarks. And we're probably hearing a lot more about people using these open weight models, which are substantially less expensive and, performance-wise, at least close to the main frontier models. I just can't imagine that there isn't, some pressure that's being put on OpenAI and Anthropic revenue and margins. I just wonder if the fact that we haven't heard any updates on revenue from Anthropic might be reflective of a possible slowdown there.
Like up until last week, I think the narrative around Chinese labs, so DeepSeek and Gwen and Minimax, were that these were fast followers and they weren't quite as good as the frontier, but just a lot cheaper. And Moonshot's Kimi K3 may be at the frontier. Like I'm hearing, rave reviews for it. And the Vercel CEO, Guillermo Rauch, just wrote that this is the first time that an open model is ahead of all proprietary ones for this comprehensive web engineering benchmark. So he's basically saying that these guys are at a lower cost are just as good as, as Claude and OpenAI. It does turn out though at launch, you cannot actually download all the raw files yet. It's all hosted exclusively on Kimi's cloud endpoints, and they're pricing the APIs at a premium pricing tier. So it's not quite open weight or open source, but I think this is what they've committed to doing by July 27. So it feels like, this is definitely complicating the decision for the US frontier models to defend pricing and defend efficacy. It's been an ongoing theme, and I think it seems like this is going to be the tough conversation on the IPO for both those companies.
I think we've been hearing from a lot of other larger companies that they're starting to pay attention to their, token costs. I think there's maybe a little bit of eyebrows raised at some of the bills that came in Q2. Brian Armstrong from Coinbase specifically talked about, trying to keep their costs down, cutting their costs in half, actually, even though their usage was increasing. And I believe he was mentioning use of open source, open weight models. One of the developments is now whether the Trump administration feels like they need to ban usage of these models. This article says the secret Trump administration battle to fight Chinese AI, but I don't think it's any secret, actually. It seems like there's a definite consideration. This is not just for national security purposes or usage, but just domestically overall, considering banning the use of these models. And I think there's been this sort of ongoing conversation about regulatory capture. And our former PAPIA colleague, David Sachs, who now is not part of the administration officially anymore. And he was highlighting that this is really maybe something we should be watching out for and not getting behind regulatory oversight, really keeping more open competition available to everybody so that there's not some leadership that's locked into place for Anthropic and OpenAI. Do you have an opinion about that, Aman? What do you think we should be doing with these Chinese models? Should we be letting everybody compete in the open arena here, or should we be giving a little bit of a thumb on the scale?
The ban these Chinese models argument sounds a lot like cheap Chinese imports are coming in and threatening U.S. industry. We've heard that one before, whether it's Chinese steel, Chinese automobiles. This probably goes back to the protectionism against Japan in the 1980s. It is true. For instance, like BYD is a great Chinese technology for EVs. They are available here in Scotland and in Europe, and they are not available in America. And why is that? Because I think the U.S., they're trying to protect the car industry and Teslas in particular and other U.S. manufacturers. The downside of banning.
But does that really protect those industries, or it just like lessens their level of competition and creates a lesser product in the long run?
Well, that I think that's the free trader argument. And also, if you ban cheap Chinese goods, whether it's AI models or cars, there are a whole lot of American consumers and businesses that would love to benefit from cheap Chinese technology. I think the twist here is that there's IP in play. So different from a car, for instance. Just to me, having a cheap car is better. And as a consumer, I'd rather have competition and not want to protect inefficient U.S. industries. The difference here may be that, a cheap Chinese model coming in that then learns from American models and doesn't play fair and is pulling information from companies or is somehow pulling information in from frontier models and using it for their own technology and then pricing it at 1/10 and essentially violating the equivalent of copyright or trade protections. If they are doing that, then I think you can make a better argument for defending U.S. interests and defending U.S. industry with some kind of
But what if
protectionist.
they're not doing that, Aman? What if they're just
Right.
actually innovating and producing better models at lower cost?
I think if that is the case, then I think I and virtually every CFO in the country would want the ability to use better models, cheaper models that are able to cut our costs and make our customers and our businesses healthier. And if that means that OpenAI and Anthropic and a few other of these AI models are not going to be as profitable or not going to be as valuable, the winner overall in terms of the beneficiaries will be far better off in that environment than the losers. But I think that you can't take out that IP from the conversation, because I think the reason to ban them or to be concerned about them is that they're using intellectual property and violating copyright and trademarks. China's been a terrible player for intellectual property forever. And if that means that they are stealing information to then undercut US companies, then that is a negative that we should look at. I don't know if that's the case. I don't think that's the case, but
Yeah.
it's that would be the argument for it.
Would you argue that even the leading U.S. frontier labs at Anthropic and OpenAI may have been grabbing
Yes.
some of that content from the original sources of information? Aren't they training on data and information that's available, and they're working with their partners to sort of develop that data? It seems like we're just talking about
Yeah.
who's stealing first and who's stealing last.
Yes. They did, or they were certainly accused of credibly, and they'll have to reckon, and there'll be settlements and fines. So I think that's where this turns, is can you demonstrate that? But I think there's not going to be a lot of desire from the current Trump administration or Congress to to really ban cheap, effective Chinese models as long as they're playing fair and square.
I got a message for all of them. Ready? Shake and bake.
What does that do? Does that blow your mind?
Another Chinese company that's preparing for an IPO, DeepSeek, is currently raising at a $71 billion valuation ahead of their IPO. They had previously just raised a $50 billion valuation not too long ago, a few months back. I guess we had a market scare from this company maybe a year ago or a year and a half ago when it first came out
Yep.
on the radar, and everybody was like, oh my gosh, Chinese companies are competing at, more levels than we thought.
Well, I think they were the first one that made everyone think, wait a second, maybe there's a cheaper model that is almost as good coming out of China that may only be a few months behind these expensive American frontier models that is going to shake up our industry. They did raise at a $50 billion valuation. That was a very unusual round. It was led by the CEO, who's really a hedge fund guy in China. It was all Chinese money, really no effectively international money. There was some money from international funds, but it was funds that mostly play in China. The question is, where do they go public? Do they do I don't think they want to do a U.S. listing for the reason that we just talked about. They wouldn't list on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ because that's a political non-starter given intense Washington scrutiny over Chinese AI architectures. So let's assume that they go either in the Shanghai Star Market or maybe the Hong Kong Hang Seng. But I think chances
Right.
are they go in Shanghai, and if they do that, I think they could go public tomorrow. Probably be a $70 to $75 billion IPO and raise $5 to $7 billion to continue their capex needs. I wouldn't be surprised if they actually do beat Anthropic to that one, because I think they have a very easy path to do that in Shanghai. The question is whether they want to go internationally and raise international money in Hong Kong, and maybe that's going to be a little bit of a longer game for them.